Good morning, good afternoon to all of you. Thanks to the International Younger Chemists Network, as well as the organizers of this conference, for giving us the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Jose de Mesa. I am a Program Management Officer at the Secretariat of the Strategic Approach to International Chemicals Management, known as SICOM. SICOM is much shorter and better. Next slide, please. What is SICOM? In a nutshell, SICOM is a global voluntary policy framework trusted by the United Nations Environment Programme to promote chemical safety around the world. Adopted in 2006, the framework aims to achieve the sound management of chemicals and waste throughout their life cycle, with the view to ensuring that chemicals are produced and used in ways that minimize significant adverse impact on the environment and human health. There are 5 objectives under the framework: risk reduction, knowledge and information, governance, capacity building and technical cooperation, and illegal international traffic. Next slide, please. So, following up on what is SICOM, it is important to know that SICOM is a multisectoral by nature. It includes participation from governments, industry, economic organizations, international organizations, the academic community, and civil society organizations. This diverse stakeholder participation is very unique and enables SICOM to coordinate and convene multiple efforts to advance the chemicals agenda. It also supports capacity building at country and regional levels and addresses emerging issues and chemicals across the whole life cycle. Next slide, please. The GEF implementation. In addition, SICOM executes a project on global best practices on emerging policy issues and issues of concern, funded by the Global Environment Facility, the GEF, to accelerate implementation on the national level to achieve the SICOM goal and support early planning for chemicals management to the 2030 agenda. Since 2019, the project is implemented in over 40 countries over a 4-year period with the partner of multiple stakeholders, including regional organizations, intergovernmental organizations, NGOs, national cleaner production centers, and academia. Our project has 3 components: chemicals in product, lead and paint, and knowledge management. On chemicals in products, it aims to more sustainably manage the life cycle of chemicals of concern in building products, toys, and electronics. On lead and paint, the project aims to promote regulatory and voluntary action by governments and industry to phase out lead in paint. Third component aim is that a broad range of stakeholders have access to information and participate in peer-to-peer learning exchanges. Please visit our recently established platform for exchange of scientific and policy information at www.scicomknowledge.org. Next slide, please. Allow me to fast forward and provide you with an update of the present context. Due to ongoing travel restrictions, the 4th meeting of the intersessional process and the 5th session of the International Conference on Chemicals Management, also known as ICCN 5, which were scheduled for 2020, have been postponed until face-to-face meetings are possible. In the meantime, the SICOM Secretariat continues to work with all stakeholders to determine the way forward as we await a decision on the date of the conference. There have been productive preliminary virtual discussions on the new instrument. Some of this reflecting on the chemicals and waste agenda and its link to the overall sustainable development agenda. Next slide, please. The chemicals agenda and Agenda 2030. The 2030 agenda commits countries to reduce the negative impact of urban activities and of chemicals which are hazardous for human health and environment, including through the environmentally sound management and safe use of chemicals, the reduction and recycling of waste, and the more efficient use of water and energy. The global goal to minimize adverse impacts of chemicals and waste has not been achieved by 2020. Solutions exist, but more ambitious worldwide action by all stakeholders is urgently required in order to contribute to the SDGs objective to meet the dual challenge of overcoming poverty and protecting the planet. Slide 7, please. On SDGs, under SDG 12, on sustainable consumption and production, member states decided to, in target 12.4, by 2020, achieve the environmentally sound management of chemicals and waste throughout their life cycle, in accordance with the agreed international framework, and significantly reduce the release to air, water, and soil in order to minimize their adverse impacts on human health and the environment. In SDG 3, target 3.9, countries decided to, by 2030, substantially reduce the number of deaths and illnesses from hazardous chemicals and air, water, and soil pollution and contamination. Also, in Goal 6, target 6.3, countries decided that by 2030, to improve water quality by reducing pollution, eliminating dumping and minimizing release of hazardous chemicals and materials having the proportion of untreated wastewater and substantially increasing recycling and safe reuse globally. Finally, on SDG 5, on gender equality, 7 on clean energy, 11 on resilient cities, and 14 on life underwater, all reference the link between the sound management of chemicals and the achievement of specific targets. Of 169 targets and 231 unique indicators under SDGs, 69 targets and 91 related indicators had been cited to be relevant to chemicals and waste. Next slide, please, slide 8. Climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. While the sound management of hazardous chemicals and waste is a challenge for achieving the SDGs, it is further complicated by the 3 planetary crises: climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution as a whole. The twin threats of climate change and biodiversity loss through increasing pollution from chemicals and waste show no signs of slowing. These threats are immediate and interrelated. It has been shown that when implemented in coordination with climate change measures, the sound management of chemicals and waste will simultaneously slow the increase of greenhouse gases and lead to improvement in environmental quality, including through the restoration of nature and ecosystems. Some of these interlinkages between climate change and hazardous chemicals and waste are: climate change can lead to increased release of hazardous chemicals into the environment. Chemicals containing products and product usage can give rise to both hazardous chemicals and greenhouse gas emissions. The waste sector is a potential source of GHG and hazardous chemicals. There can be both synergies and sometimes trade-off between mitigation measures for release of gas and hazardous chemicals. Next slide, please. Slide 9. The biodiversity loss and pollution. Sorry. It is an established fact that biodiversity helps to keep the effects of climate change at bay. Therefore, protecting biodiversity is vital for human health and well-being. The problem is not just toxic chemicals, but the huge material flows from the extraction of raw materials, including bio-based materials, and the waste generated, as well as the ubiquitous disposal of even non-toxic residues such as plastic, which is one of the main threats to biodiversity. As stated in the recently published Global Assessment Report on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, pollution is one of the main drivers of biodiversity loss. Pollution from within agriculture production systems and beyond, including pesticides, plastics, and heavy metals, urban influence and excess nutrients, it's a major cause of the decline in many populations, of many important species, of associated biodiversity. There is a growing body of evidence that microplastics interact with terrestrial organisms, that mediate essential ecosystem services and functions, thus suggesting that microplastic pollution might represent an emerging global change threat to terrestrial ecosystems. E-waste pollution disproportionately affects developing countries, where electronic devices are often disposed of in a non-environmentally sound manner, often compounded by the fact that such wastes are not all domestically generated. Transformation of key polluting sectors in developing countries can provide major benefits for diversity and ecosystem services, as well as the human health of workers and their communities, while promoting significant economic sectors and contributing to a circular economy. Next slide, slide 10, please. Science policy interface. Given its multi-sectoral engagement, SciComm stakeholders are keen to engage the latest thinking on best practices to advance the chemicals and waste agenda. A key ongoing discussion is the need for the creation of a science policy interface for chemicals and waste. Currently, different options are being assessed, including an independent platform comparable to those existing for the other two big environment crises next to pollution, climate change with the IPCC, and biodiversity loss with IPBES. Other possible structures are also discussed. In any case, the platform should be independent and deliver authoritative outputs that are policy relevant but not policy prescriptive. Additionally, any such platform must be perceived as legitimate, relevant, and transparent, and it should provide recommendations to close existing gaps and help us target resources to the most immediate challenges and find the best solutions. Next slide. Slide 11 on youth engagement. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, SciComm is a multi-stakeholder approach. Youth are actively engaged and can play a meaningful role in advancing the implementation of the SciComm mandate. The SciComm Secretariat closely collaborates with a growing group of engaged young people. For instance, with the Chemicals and Waste Youth Platform of the major group of children and youth to the UN Environment Programme, SciComm acts as a bridge between decision makers and youth to foster cooperation towards meaningful youth engagement in the chemicals and waste agenda. Slide 12, please. To conclude, we have 5 important messages for you to take home. First one, SciComm is a global voluntary policy framework hosted by the United Nations Environment Programme to promote chemical safety around the world, and it is unique in its multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholder nature. Second, with the JEF project, SciComm also implements projects on the ground. In over 40 countries, we support national activities and value chain initiatives to achieve the SciComm goal. Third conclusion, the sound management of chemicals and waste is key to achieving most, if not all, the SDGs, including health, good food, clean water, gender equality, and many more. Number 4, the 3 planetary crises of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution are interrelated and producing, using, and disposing chemicals safely in an important factor to combat climate change and biodiversity loss. Finally, the 5th one, to all scientists. Robust science is the fundament of sound chemicals and waste management. The international community is currently discussing ways to institutionalize an effective two-way communication between scientists and policymakers. Last slide, please, slide 13. To conclude, I want to thank again the International Younger Chemists Network for this opportunity, especially Joao for his very personal and dedicated support, and thank to all listeners for taking the time. And please have a look at our website, follow us on Twitter, and find out more about chemicals and waste on the SciComm Knowledge platform. Thank you very much to all, and goodbye.